The Historical Society of Ottawa acknowledges that as we share these stories from our past, we are on what remains the unceded land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. This series is a collaboration between the Historical Society of Ottawa and Rogers TV. I'm Ben Weiss. I'm with the Historical Society of Ottawa, where we've been telling Ottawa's great story since 1898. If you find Ottawa history as fascinating as we do, I urge you to check out our website, our monthly speaker series, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And enjoy today's segment.
It's my pleasure today to speak about a book I wrote a year or so ago on the life of my father. Well-known personality here in Ottawa, Gord Atkinson of CFRA and CFMO fame. And this presentation is really based on that book. And I'm very pleased to talk about Ottawa as it was in the 1950s and 1960s from the standpoint of the entertainment scene. And I want you to go back in time, if you're of that vein, if you're young, to imagine a city that was very different from it is today. My father arrived from Toronto, where he was born and worked in radio for approximately 5 or 6 years. He arrived in Ottawa in February of 1954. And as I say, this was a very different city. It was a small city. And in terms of entertainment, one could go to the movies or one could listen to the radio, because television was still very much in its infancy, particularly here in Ottawa, where there were really only 2 English language TV stations. And most of the big American variety comedy drama shows had not fully made the transition yet to television from radio. So when my father arrived here, hired by the program director at radio station CFRA, Frank Ryan, to be the entertainment editor for CFRA, he was asked to do a show called The Supper Club in the evenings. And really what that Supper Club consisted of was introducing American comedy, drama, variety shows, and interspersing some music at the same time. Well, not long after he started doing that programming, in the fall of 1954, he realized that there was quite a thirst here in Ottawa and an opportunity for a show which focused on popular music, and particularly music that appealed to teenagers and people in their 20s and 30s. So my father launched a show called Campus Corner. And the program was really a program that featured the top songs, the top hits. And in the course of that program, which ran on Saturday afternoons, my father, over the years, from approximately 1954 through to about 1960, when Campus Corner changed to another show, he interviewed a number of entertainers who came to the Ottawa area to perform and whose records were popular through radio programs such as my father's. It's hard to believe, but in 1954, 1955, rock and roll had really not arrived here in Ottawa. And so my father found in the first few years of this show, he spent the majority of his time interviewing more traditional singers and quartets. And he would go over to what was the entertainment capital or center of Ottawa at the time. And that was not in Ottawa. It was across the river in Hull, specifically on the Lower Elmer Road Strip, which had huge nightclubs such as the Gatineau Club, the Chaudière Rose Room, the Old Ottawa House. And he would race over there to meet and interview many of these popular singers of the day, and then feature their music on his program. There were people such as Tony Bennett, who had a long, very long career in entertainment, but he started really back in the 1950s. There were the Four Aces, the most popular singing quartet of the era, famous for the song Three Coins in the Fountain, which you've probably heard, and the song Love is a Many Splendored Thing. He also met a very youthful Harry Belafonte, as well as a number of other performers who all came through this Lower Elmer corridor to perform in Ottawa. Perhaps his most memorable interview at that time was with a singer from the San Francisco area by the name of Johnny Mathis, who was at the time a university student. And when my father saw him perform over at the old Ottawa House in Hull in 1957, Johnny Mathis was not known. He was almost obscure at the time. And my father remembers racing over to, after work, racing over to see him perform, meeting him, hearing that he was a tremendously talented young singer, interviewed him, started to play his songs on the record, and lo and behold, 2 weeks later, Johnny Mathis appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show and became, quote, an overnight success, and never looked back. 25 years later, after that meeting, when he talked to my father in California, Johnny Mathis remembered meeting my father. He remembered that show in Ottawa as being very formative and was very appreciative to my father at the time for playing his music, because very few people were at the time. Let's jump ahead a little bit now. By the late 50s, the music texture of Ottawa changed dramatically. And it changed with one concert down at the old auditorium. No, not Elvis Presley. In fact, Ottawa's first rock and roll concert was about 6 months before Elvis Presley. And it was by a number of performers, Chuck Berry, the Platters, and the headliner was Bill Haley and his Comets, Rock Around the Clock. My father remembers that first concert at the auditorium. He was on stage, he helped MC and bring the acts on. And as he tells the story, quite interesting from a historical point of view, that concert almost never happened because the city fathers, such as they were in Ottawa at the time, city police, the boards of education, were very much against having a rock and roll concert here in Ottawa because they had heard the stories, mostly exaggerated, of riots and raucous behavior of young people at these big rock and roll shows, which were still very new at the time. So there was a lot of resistance to this. The Ottawa police ended up putting on extra police force all around the old auditorium. And the show went on, but under a number of conditions. All of the young people there, and there were thousands of them, were warned. They were to remain in their seats for the entire show. And there were, I think, upwards of 10 different acts. But they would remain in their seats the whole time. They could clap, but they were not to shout. They were not to stomp their feet. And under no circumstances were they to get out of their chairs and dance. Well, the irony of the whole thing, and my dad was eyewitness to all of it, was that the concert was actually a rather tame affair. A huge crowd, 6,000 or 7,000 young people jammed into the old Odd, which didn't sit that many people. And the concert went on without a hitch, and my father wrote about at the time, in a column he had in the Ottawa Citizen, and talked about for years after, just how professional the whole thing was and how much he was impressed by some of these young entertainers, like Bill Haley, Chuck Berry, and the Platters, who the traditional world of popular music had really looked down their noses collectively at. Well, the main thing people really want to hear when they talk to my dad during his career was the day Elvis Presley came to town, April 3rd, 1957. Elvis only made three appearances outside of the United States during his entire career. All three appearances were in 1957, and all three were in Canada. Two were back-to-back. He played Toronto the night before Ottawa and arrived in Ottawa to do 2 shows, one in the afternoon and one in the evening, taking the train from Toronto. My father had been asked by Presley's management team about a week before the concert to introduce Elvis on stage and kind of serve as his, how can I say, chaperone while he was here in Ottawa. Elvis was heavily guarded at the time by his management team. He was not permitted the entire time he was here to go anywhere except the hotel he stayed, and when he arrived at the auditorium, he was not to leave there, even between the 2 shows. And my father, looking back, thought this was incredibly absurd. Here was the young superstar of the world of rock and roll, selling millions of records, the idol of tens of millions of young people. And my father walked into a dirty, rundown dressing room for hockey players with nothing but hooks on it for Elvis to hang his clothes. And here was Elvis sitting alone, no one around him. All kinds of police and his management staff outside the dressing room door, keeping the young people away. But my dad walked in, and lunch for Elvis and dinner were a couple of cheese sandwiches and cartons of milk. That was it. The glamorous life of a superstar in the world of rock and roll. But my dad was very struck with Elvis. He was not what he thought he was. There were all sorts of stories about he was wild and crazy and living on the wrong side of the street and this sort of thing. But my father, throughout his life, said that Elvis was a gentleman. A real, and he meant this in the best of ways, a fine country boy with good old-fashioned manners. My father interviewed him between the 2 shows, and throughout that entire interview, which you will hear in one of the video clips that I provided for this presentation, he called my father sir through that whole interview, even though my dad was only 6 or 7 years older than Elvis at the time. Elvis was 22, my father was 29. As for the performance itself, performances I should say, because there were 2, my father says they were incredible. My father, for hours, prepared his introduction to Elvis. And when he walked on stage, he said the loudest roar he'd ever heard in his life went up, and not a single person heard a syllable of what he said. So he said, I quickly realized that all I had to do was wave my hand up in the air and say, Elvis Presley, and get the heck off that stage. He said Elvis was quite a showman, as I think history has really shared the story of Elvis Presley, what an accomplished performer he was. But my father was quite struck with one other thing about Elvis, and that was that when he spoke to Elvis in the dressing room, and he was alone with him for quite a while, particularly between the 2 shows, Elvis shared his anxiety with my father, his concerns that he was going to be a one-hit wonder, a flash in the pan, here today and gone tomorrow. And my father recalls that Elvis had a lot of concern about that. My father didn't, because as he told Alex, he said, you're already branching off into singing ballads and different styles of music from rock and roll. And so he encouraged Elvis to cultivate that. The interview with Presley was quite amazing. In the interview, Presley went out of his way, as you'll hear in the clip, to thank the teenagers and young people of Ottawa for their cards and letters. He said he was overwhelmed by them. And in fact, Elvis had requested, when he did the tour, that he come up to Ottawa and Toronto because he was receiving more fan mail from those areas. And early in his career, he was receiving a lot more fan mail from these areas than in most parts of the United States. And Elvis never forgot that my father and other DJs up here in Ottawa and in places like Toronto were playing his music quite regularly before he was being played across America.
Well, Elvis, and this may seem a foolish question for a Presley fan to ask. It seems an obvious answer. But have you yourself ever given any thought to just exactly what it is about you that has made you the phenomenal show business personality that you are?
I sure haven't. In fact, I don't even like to try to figure it out because I'm afraid if I find out what it is, I might lose it. So I just keep guessing myself. You know?
It's that unknown commodity.
Well, I've been wanting to come up here, and in fact, when they started booking the tour, I said, by all means, I want to go to Canada. In fact, about a year ago, I tried to get them to book a tour up here, and I wasn't well known enough. About a year and a half ago, they didn't know me well enough. See?
Sounds almost unbelievable.
So they figured that I wouldn't make enough money. You know?
With your permission, I would like to present this scroll to you this evening on behalf of all the fans from CFRA.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Elvis, I wonder if you would say something to all those fans right now.
Well, I would like to tell them how I deeply appreciate it, and I've gotten more fan mail from right around in this area than I have anywhere else in the States. In the United States, you know.
Well, that's wonderful. You'll be hearing from us.
I don't tell you that because I'm here, but it's very true. That's one reason I've always wanted to come up here. Because, gee whiz, I've gotten more letters from Canada than I could ever count.
Well, that should make your fans here very happy. It's been a sincere pleasure to be talking to Elvis Presley.
Thank you very much.
That's the Elvis Presley story. Well, there's a lot more to it, but history tells a lot of it. Again, we'll flash ahead a few years. In 1958, Campus Corner was so popular that my father came up with an idea that station management at CFRA and station owner Frank Ryan thought was crazy. He wanted to run these massive, what he called campus hops, massive dances and talent shows down at the Coliseum on the exhibition grounds here in Ottawa. They would be free. Kids would dance to the songs of all the top stars, but as well, because my father was always interested in promoting local talent, they would have a talent show. And he would bring up all the acts from the high schools, all the kids imitating Elvis Presley and everything else, and they would perform, and there would be a contest winner. So he wanted to run the first one in October of 1958, and as I said, the station was dead set against it. He was told repeatedly, this will flop, you're not going to get anybody to show up, it'll be disorganized, the kids will misbehave, it'll be a disaster. Well, he ran the first campus hop, and over 5,000 people showed up, young people. It was an enormous hit. And from that campus hop and successive hops, because once the first one was successful, management was only too happy to have several more. Out of those campus hops was launched the careers of a number of fine and very famous Ottawa entertainers. Central to these, Paul Anka, Ottawa's teen idol of the 1950s. Anka had a long association with my dad. It started when my dad had first come to Ottawa, and he used to frequent a restaurant called the Locanda, which was on the corner of Bank and Laurier. And the restaurant was owned by Paul's parents. Paul would run around, as Paul Anka would tell the story, constantly pestering my dad, telling him he wanted to get into entertainment, he wanted to be a singer, he was writing songs. So my father decided to have him up in the studios, live on a Saturday afternoon broadcast of the Campus Club, along with his trio called the Bobby Soxers. Well, Anka was an immediate hit, and soon a partnership and a friendship developed. My father encouraged Anka, though. He said, you need to go to New York to record. That's the center of the recording industry. And so Paul went down there in May 1957 with a song he'd written called Diana, recorded it. Well, 2 weeks later, it was an enormous hit. And again, the rest was history. The other young entertainer from Ottawa that got his start through my dad's Campus Corner and the Campus Hops was Rich Little, the impressionist. Similar story. When he was in high school, performing with a high school friend of his named Jeff Scott, my dad was amazed at the quality of their impressions. They were imitating not only their teachers, but Canadian politicians and movie stars and even singers. So my dad had them on live, the Campus Corner, and they were a big hit too. My father encouraged Rich to continue his career as an impressionist. He did. In 1964, he was booked on the Judy Garland show, And in a 6-7 minute segment with her, he had her literally falling out of her chair with laughter at his impressions of movie stars. And he became, as well, an overnight success. Move into the 1960s, because I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the campus club, which was an outgrowth of the campus corner. The name changed. Now it was not just a Saturday afternoon program. It was a program that ran Monday to Fridays in the evenings for kids. It was immensely popular. At one time, there were over 25,000 card-carrying members of the campus club. And again, my dad continued the same format, winning format, of interviewing all the big stars of the world of popular music, particularly rock and roll, many of whom are featured in some of the pictures that are accompanying this presentation. But also, he continued to promote local talent through the campus club. Finally, I want to say a few words, really in summary here, about my father's legacy for the city of Ottawa. It's a two-part legacy. Three-part, actually. One part was promoting local talent, like Paul Anka and Rich Little. Second part of it was the charitable initiatives he did, which are featured in a video that you will see with this presentation. He did a lot of things, such as the Christmas Exchange on a yearly basis that raised a tremendous amount of money for charities. But his main contribution in the way of charitable enterprises was the 1981 Rich Little Frank Sinatra benefit concert, which raised over $1 million for the Ottawa Hospital.
Frank used to say to me, "Richie, baby, if anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to ask."
So Rich told me this, and I said, gosh, do you think we could ever get him to come to Ottawa for the Civic Hospital?
A great admirer of Rich Little, and well aware of Gord's work on the Crosby years, Sinatra immediately agreed to do the benefit, and at no cost.
I can remember saying to him, "Are you sure you want to do this, Frank? I mean, we don't have to pay you?" And you know what he said to me? You don't know this. He said to me, "Pay me for a benefit for the hospital? No, of course not." And then he said, "What would I do with Canadian money anyway?"
Sinatra also agreed to fly to Ottawa at his own expense, but would require approximately 1 year to fit the concert into his busy schedule. Thousands of hours of planning took place during 1981, and Gord was to be master of ceremonies for the highly anticipated evening.
The auditorium was packed with people, 30,000 or more people, and the Prime Minister was there, and all the dignitaries, and everything laid on, and everything set, and the dinner and everything. And I'm thinking, did I give him the right date?
It was a spectacular evening, first class all the way, and to see the kind of ease with which he brought them in and was able to introduce them. I think that was a highlight for me. I was terribly nervous for him, terribly nervous. But I knew that once he was into it, he wouldn't be.
I remember sitting next to Trudeau, and he was like a fan, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. "Oh, Rich, I mean, what does he like to eat, and what does he like to do? Have you been to his home?" It was amazing, and everybody was in awe of him, of course.
Sinatra insisted he perform first, so Rich could close the show before his hometown fans.
And in one evening, the foundation, we raised over $1 million and built the Rich Little Special Care Nursery at the Civic. So I have only warm memories of Frank Sinatra. I always say, you judge people on how you found them, and that most assuredly is how I found it.
And finally, the last part of his legacy, Gord was also responsible for some tremendous quality programming. His program, 14-part Crosby Years, on the life of Bing Crosby, won a number of awards internationally, including the impressive Armstrong Foundation Award from Columbia University in the United States. It's a legacy of excellence. It's a legacy of giving back to the community, and I'm very proud today to be able to focus on the life and times of my father, Gord Atkinson.